Hello everyone, welcome back to the Analyst for 9th of April 2024, where we will be trying to understand the most important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Now looking at the table of contents, we find that the very first article is regarding climate change and fundamental rights regarding the latest Supreme Court judgment on the same. In the second article, we'll be trying to understand the various innovations in traditional agriculture practiced in Shekhawati region of Rajasthan. In the third article, we'll be looking into the various countries and the various regions guidelines on the regulation of the artificial intelligence technology. In the fourth article, we'll be looking at a practice known as co-lending, which is practiced by banks and NBFCs in the country. And finally, we'll be wrapping up the session with Forex trading platform, wherein the recent RBI regulations came directly. In the final space, we'll be trying to cover Prelims Snippet, which will be trying to understand the various important articles in the newspapers, prominently for your quick revision for your prelims examination, which is coming soon. So students, in the very first article, we'll be looking at the impacts of climate change and the impact on the fundamental rights that it has. Now here recently the Supreme Court has passed a reserved judgment regarding the same, and this is very important for your prelims, particularly because we have general issues on environment and ecology. Also, with respect to GS2, we have the Indian Constitution, where we have the various features of the Constitution, and one of the features is your fundamental rights. And finally, according to GS3, we have to look into the various aspects of conservation and the various impacts of environmental degradation on our day-to-day lives. Now here, to begin with, the Supreme Court has particularly deliberated on a very important issue concerning the great Indian bustard. Now see, this has been covered in the previous analysts and the various impacts and the various regulations in the same, but here we will be trying to understand briefly what is the background, and mainly we will be focusing on the impact of climate change on our fundamental rights. Now see, recently the Supreme Court has deliberated on the issue of the great Indian bustard, and we know that the species of GIB is particularly endemic to India as of now, and also particularly endemic to the Indian subcontinent. Now this species is prominently found in the state of Rajasthan, where due to the various renewable energy projects of solar energy, the species is facing the risk of extinction due to the construction of heavy tension power lines, power transmission lines in those regions. What happens is that the birds generally gets caught in those lines, power transmission lines, and effectively they die due to electrocution. And that is why some of the petitioners with respect to wildlife activists, they came to the Supreme Court, they came to Indian judiciary, and they brought up this matter up to the court. And the court has been hearing this issue over a long period of time, since particularly seriously since 2021. And here in 2021, the Supreme Court granted protection status to the great Indian bustard, and prominently the Supreme Court mooted the underground power lines, because I told you the overhead power lines is electrocuting the birds during their flight. And generally after this particular verdict, the government moved the Supreme Court, and it's the government via the Ministry of Forests and the Ministry of Renewable Energy, the government argued that if the Supreme Court is placing a ban on the overhead transmission line, it will be impacting the India's climate ambitions, particularly to reach the non-fossil fuel power generation of 500 gigawatts by 2030. And the government argued that this regulation will be making the renewable push for India very costly, and that is why it moved up the Supreme Court in this matter. And later, in this particular judgment of 2024, which we have the case name as M.K. Ranjit Singh, in this judgment, the Supreme Court recently also understood some of the issues that the government told, that there are some technical challenges of constructing this underground power lines. So Supreme Court for this matter referred this matter to a 9-member committee, which will be looking into the feasibility of underground power lines, and then it will be submitting its recommendation by the month of June or July. And by this, the Supreme Court also underscored India's ambition of achieving 450 gigawatts of installed solar capacity and renewable capacity by 2030. And for this, the Supreme Court also told that India's climate change agreements internationally under Paris Agreement is a very important one, particularly when we look at the global challenges of climate change. And that is the Supreme Court also told that yes, on one side, the issue of climate change and the migration, or say the energy transition to renewable energy from fossil fuel is very, very important. But on the same hand, the conservation status and the conservation needs of this species of great Indian bustard is equally important. And that is why also, apart from this case, apart from these issues, the Supreme Court also told that the Article 21 that gives the right to life and liberty is equally important to the individuals when we are talking about climate change and its impacts, because we understand the climate change phenomena which is taking place all over the world and also more severely in India via many extreme weather events and various other climate change induced events is actually putting some people, particularly the vulnerable sections of the population, at risks. So that is why the Supreme Court told that the Article 21, which is a fundamental right of the country and of the citizens of the country, which it underscores the importance of right to life and liberty of the citizens, and that is why we have to understand that this right cannot be isolated with also two important articles of the Constitution. Particularly, first we have the DPSP, Directive Principles of State Policy of Article 48A, under Article 48A, which underscores the right of the, or say the need of the government and also the responsibilities of the government of the day to protect the environment and wildlife. This is the directive principle that we have. On the other hand, it is also the duty, fundamental duty of the individuals under Article 51A, subclause G, where we have the fundamental duty of the individuals, of the citizens of the country, to protect wildlife and the environment at large. So the Supreme Court told that we have to look at these provisions togetherly. And for this, we have to understand the Supreme Court used a very, very important phrase, which you can also use in your mains answers. And mind it, the phrase is very, very important. It is climate change through the lens right. That means the Supreme Court is telling that we have to look at climate change through the lens right. That means we have in India various fundamental rights, which is guaranteed under the Constitution. That is why it is also known as constitutional rights of the individuals, and these are very, very important rights which actually the state or the country has to provide to its individual in a very efficient manner. And if we extend this clause, the Supreme Court which has told, we get various rights such as right to life, health, right to food, right to water, right to culture, livelihood, and finally right to development. Please note that this list of rights are not exhaustive. We have various other rights under the same, and the Supreme Court is telling that the impacts of climate change on these rights have to be seen through the climate change issue and also through the lens rights. This means that right to life nowadays through climate change, it has been impacted through extreme weather events such as heat waves, storms, floods, sea level rising, and so on. Right to health is impacted through air pollution, diseases, mental health issues from disasters, and so on. Right to food is impacted through droughts, floods, which is impacting the Indian agriculture. Right to water is being impacted through glacier melting, then altered use of land use such as impacting groundwater depletion. We have right to culture, which is also impacted through climate change, particularly via displacement of people due to extreme weather events. And finally, right to development is also impacted via climate change through climate impacts, which is improportionally impacting the global south or the developing nations of the world, particularly India. And here, this is also developing the main impacts on the climate change, which is ultimately also impacting the progress economically and also developmentally. So here we find that now Supreme Court for the very first time did not say on this matter. Earlier also we had many cases, particularly relating to Article 21 under right to life. Now Supreme Court made a very, very important statement that right to life is not of mere existence. That means right to life does not mean that you should be only alive. You should be alive with proper dignity, with proper facilities, and your life should be also meaningful. That means you should be having the liberty, the opportunities to develop yourselves, and only you can develop yourselves if you have the proper environment regarding the same. Particularly when we talk of environment, it can be professional environment, it can be educational, it can be political, it can also be the environment which we know ecologically. So that is why for the very first time in 1954 we see a very, very important order from the Supreme Court, particularly under Kovaji B. Varucha versus Excise Commissioner of Ajmer. In here, the Supreme Court ruled that the courts can impose reasonable restriction on right to trade and commerce in the country, which has been guaranteed under Article 19. So it is implying that this regional restriction must be there, but this regional restriction can also be implied when we are talking about environmental issues that is taking place due to trade and commerce. Now, under MC Mehta case, which is a very important case, and for the first time the Supreme Court told that right to live is actually the right to live in pollution free environment. After this, in the Dehradun quarrying case of 1988, the Supreme Court told that it is the individual's right to clean environment too. So Supreme Court, through the various judgments over a period of time, it has rightfully told that environmental and the various fundamental rights, these are all related. But we have to understand, is the Supreme Court according fundamental rights status to environment the only task that is, say, final in the matter? No, because ultimately if something is fundamental right, it has to be backed by some statutes or laws and regulations by the parliament or the government. And that is why whenever we see that something is actually accorded a fundamental right status by the Supreme Court, that is actually the opportunity for the parliament to take note of. And also we have to understand that when the Supreme Court has entertained these particular rights as fundamental rights, this is also opening the potential future litigations regarding environmental violations and climate change issues too, which are actually very positive scenarios. But unless and until the parliament is not taking note and passing some laws and regulations, particularly protecting people from the impacts of the climate change, then this fundamental right status is not at all, say, effective in real life. Now here, the implications of the recent Ranjit Singh case of 2024 is very serious. Firstly, the Supreme Court noted, as we have seen over the previous slides, firstly the positive thing that Supreme Court has noted is about India's commitments towards climate change, negotiations and goals. So Supreme Court told that yes, India's international commitments to fight climate change is very effective, and the policies of renewable energy and the various green hydrogen missions and the various green missions India is trying to impose on the recent regulatory framework of the country is highly encouraged. That is a positive thing, which is a positive development. But on the negative side, there is not a single law which is there for the people of the country that is protecting them from the vagaries of the climate change. So that is one issue that India is having, that if we are seeing right now severe heat waves, severe extreme weather events, so is there a particular national law to protect the people from the same, to compensate the people for the same, to protect the vulnerable sections of the population from the same? No. The Supreme Court told that there is a void of legislation, of law protecting people from climate change, despite this being a fundamental right of the people under Article 21. And here the Supreme Court also brought in the Article 14, which is right to equality, and also the Article 21, which is right to life. The Supreme Court told that both of these fundamental rights are sources of the people for a clean environment and the right to be protected against adverse impacts of the climate change. So for the very first time, the Supreme Court is telling that there should be a particular legislation, and also because these two rights are the sources for a right to clean environment and to be protected against the climate change, the government of the day must be doing something in this matter. And finally, it is also to be noted that it is the inability of the underserved communities or the vulnerable sections of the population, the minorities, the poorer sections of the populations, the various scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, they are the most affected from the climate change aspects, and that is why the government also should be taking note of this. And finally, according to various legal experts, we find that this judgment is a very important legal precedent, and for the coming years this judgment will be standing as a true lighthouse in this direction. And also this judgment has to be seen in the case of rights-based approach. That means that according to the fundamental right status to the a status of protection from the vagaries of the climate change, the Supreme Court has brought in a rights-based approach in this matter. That means that there should be a legal basis for protection against climate change, and also it is empowering people, because if there is a legal right of the people apart from the fundamental right, they can also move the courts. Apart from the fundamental rights, they can also move the courts, but if there is a legal basis of the same, then it is further empowering the people even more. And finally, any justice can also be easily sought according to the penalties, rules and fines and regulations which may be framed by the parliament. Now in the next article, we will be looking at a very important case study which is very important for your mains, because Time and again these types of news come out in the newspapers, particularly with reference to sustainable practices in the Indian agriculture, which you can easily quote in your mains answers to enhance the value of your answers. So here what happened is that farmers in Shekhawati region of Rajasthan, which is actually a very dry piece of land recently, and also where the groundwater tables are depleting progressively, farmers there are still able to farm the various crops that they used to farm earlier using innovative measures. And here this is very important for our prelims, particularly in the agriculture sections of economy, and particularly in GS3, where we have major cropping patterns in the various parts of the country. Now here we will be looking at a single part of a country which is actually water scarce and also known as a dry land, because if we look at this particular area of Rajasthan, it is severely water depleted. Now here let us first understand the very basics of what is a traditional farming. Now see, traditional farming has some features. The very first is actually a crop focus. For example, the farmers who do traditional farming, they have some crop in their mind, and this crop they cultivate year and year again and again. For example, it can be a staple item such as rice or wheat. Right? For example, if they are cultivating rice and wheat, which are actually water guzzling crops, let me tell you. So the farmers will be practicing and say cultivating this again and again and again over a particular period of time. So this is a very first feature of traditional farming. Second feature is that they are very high reliant on the rainfall patterns of the nation. For example, in India, most of the say parts of the country is actually heavily reliant on monsoons, and this is also a very particular phenomenon, a basic feature of the Indian agriculture, where most of the country is actually dependent on the rainfall. Third, the traditional agriculture is very labor intensive, where they minimally use major or say innovative irrigation structures, say harvesting machines and so on, and also modern crop varieties and fertilizers are not used as extensively as commercial farmings. So that is why we understand that they are actually minimally using machines and modern technology. On the other hand, they are using more and more labor, while in some cases some kind of machines are definitely used in traditional agriculture, but again the use of machines is very or say the frequency of use is very limited. And finally, this also leads to environmental degradation, particularly firstly due to cropping focus, because they generally, the farmers in India who actually focus on traditional farming, they focus on the crops which are very water guzzling in nature, such as rice and wheat. So they lead to severe water degradation, and also whenever in some cases they use some fertilizers, they use in very bulk amounts and in large amounts of fertilizers. So that also leads to environmental degradation, particularly phenomena such as eutrophication and so on. And here we obviously understand the issues is firstly of low productivity, because we find that this traditional agriculture using very less machines, low amount of high yielding variety seeds and water and so on through irrigation. So that is why the productivity is very less. The irrigation issues are also there because they are dependent on the monsoon. And finally, the soil degradation also takes place due to the environmental degradation feature here. So here, what the Rajasthan farmers they did in Shekhawat, they adopted some modern techniques along with traditional farming. So here we will be looking at a very unique case study, and please do note these things down in your class notes, because you have to code these things in your mains answers for getting that extra 1 mark. See, in our very first one, we will be discussing about the modern techniques that the farmers there are using, such as drip irrigation. So in drip irrigation, we have several pipelines which are say stretched along the crop fields, and the pipelines are fitted with small holes, and the small holes are located just at the tip of the roots, or they say at the end of the stem of the plants. So using precise measurements, the farmers turn on the tap, and the irrigation that happens is actually by drop and drop. So this is actually using water very cleverly. Then they are also using solar power panels to actually fuel the water pumps there, and this is reducing the reliance on the electricity that the farmers are using on their fields. And finally, the farmers also use poly houses, which are actually small kinds of settlements where we have greenhouse like features, wherein within the greenhouse we cultivate various amounts of crops. So this will be giving also protection to the plants from various water retention, and also related to severe heat. Then the farmers, they are also capitalized on heavily on various government schemes such as the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana to construct various ponds for rainwater harvesting too. So they are trying to conserve water very efficiently. Also recently the farmers are also shifting towards cultivation of fruits, vegetables, which is known as horticulture, and they are also getting heavy returns on the same, because apart from the rice and wheat, the fruits and vegetables are actually giving the farmers more and more income in a much shorter period of time. So this is also something which they are also benefiting, particularly due to these irrigation schemes, due to these innovative measures, and also due to some efforts of some people. There is one very eminent farmer who is known as Sundaram Verma in this region, who also got the Padma Shri award from the president of the country because of its very ingenious way of planting trees. So in his technique of agriculture, which we also know as dry land agroforestry, he is supposed to grow a whole grown tree with just using 1 liter of water. So you can understand, using just 1 liter, right, or say 1 bottle of water, you can plant an entire tree. So that is why he is also known popularly in this region, and he has helped transforming the dry lands in this region to lush forests. And also apart from this, the diversification and value addition of the agricultural crops, particularly by processing them, or say setting up food processing plants for fruits. Then we have organic farming, which the farmers are also doing there, and also animal husbandry, because the farmers are also combining dairy farming, poultry farming with this proper traditional farming. So this is actually helping the farmers to diversify their source of income apart from depending only on crops, fruits or vegetables. And finally, there are some community organizations such as Sikar Sambhag Nahar Lao Sangarshan Samiti, which is trying to also converge the various communities in these regions, in this particular region, to focus or say spread these innovative ideas among various farmers and various farm dwelling communities too. So here the main thing we have to understand, that if we can replicate the Shekhawati model across India, this will be very beneficial, because we are actually staring at two Indian maps here, where we have the various irrigation sources in the country. Mainly if we look at the map, we find that we have various sources of irrigation in the country, such as canal, tanks, wells and tube wells. And we can see most of the country in white patches, right, they are either say irrigated by tube wells, or they are sometimes fully dry land. This can be also be corroborated from this map. See here, look at this low scale irrigation regions, such as the areas in yellow, which is actually prevalent almost in all parts of the country. That means these are the regions which are severely water depleted, and also going forward in the next 10 to 20 years, due to groundwater depletion, due to heavy cultivation of crops such as rice and wheat, the areas are being further depleted of water. So that is why we can replicate the Shekhawati model and also take some inspiration from this case study around the entire country. So some key observation is that the farmers all across the country, they can turn water scarcity into innovation by actually shifting away from water intensive crops to vegetable cultivation. Right? They can also adopt new water saving technologies, such as building more and more ponds in regional areas. They can also conserve water using rainwater harvesting. They can also use solar pumps regarding the same, and that is where the technology also comes in. Drip irrigation, rainwater harvesting, solar power, poly houses, these are all some very cost effective technologies, very innovative kind of technologies which the farmers can effectively use across the country. And remember, when I was talking about poly houses, this is actually poly house where we control the climate of a particular crop for its cultivation. And also farmers can also learn from this model by diversifying into higher value crops such as vegetable, fruits, and also they can practice organic farming by being very water efficient. They can also focus on value addition such as processing. They can also produce some candies and say various jellies based on the produce on their own fields. They can in this manner reduce the wastage in the Indian agriculture too. And apart from this, the individual initiative which is focusing on innovation and water saving initiatives, and also the community movement, as we have also seen in the case of the Sekhar Sangarshan committee. So they are actually trying to spread the awareness among the various farmers. And finally, the government of the day, they must be learning from all these innovations taking place in various pockets of the country. So this region of Shekhawati is not only the only region in India which is doing this kind of efforts. So there are many states, there are many areas in those states, such as the northeast, such as even the southern parts of the nation, where we have many innovative agricultural practices. So the government of the day, they must also be on this side, spreading the awareness regarding the same. And also the subsidy schemes, particularly for rainwater, farm ponds, they must be enhanced so that the farmers, they can themselves take the initiative of promoting the same. In the next one, we will be discussing on AI regulation, the regulation with respect to artificial intelligence, because recently the efforts to formalize AI regulations at the global level will be very critical to actually know the various impacts and the risks coming from the same, and also to the various governance sectors in all the countries. This is very, very important with respect to general science in prelims, and in GS3 we also have the topic of awareness in the fields of IT and computers, within which artificial intelligence is a very, very important topic right now, because every day, almost every day, we at least have one article or two in our newspapers on artificial intelligence. And also AI has been covered in the previous analyst sessions with respect to what is AI, the various differences and the various kinds of AI and so on. Here we will be looking as to how the various governance initiatives of the various nations and some of the bodies in the international area functions with respect to artificial intelligence. And at the very first instance we have the United Nations resolution on artificial intelligence. The very first thing that this resolution did is actually to highlight the risks that is coming from the AI. Now we know that artificial intelligence is actually very, very useful in our day-to-day lives. It can automate the various industrial processes, it can help lead research and development in the country, it can also help augment the labor force of the country to increasing the labor productivity. But the risks out of the same cannot be ignored too. Particularly first, it is often told that AI will be replacing jobs of the various fields such as software engineers, writers and so on. It is also told that the training models, or say the computer models of the AI on the data that on which they have been trained, carry various bias. The bias can be ranging from caste bias to racial bias and so on. So in result, the final AI product can also be laid with bias, as also has been recently seen in the case of Google Gemini, which is also prompting giving out results, differing results with reference to developing nations and developed countries, showing bias towards developed nations. Next, we also issues of privacy, where the AI models can be trained discreetly to violate people's rights on the online digital media. We also have this issue of deepfakes, particularly an outshoot of people violating people's privacy by creating fake videos of people which those people did not ever create, using AI systems. Then we also have persuasive AI, or those kinds of AI which is also manipulating individual or people's behavior online. Then we also have countries like China, which is also trying to weaponize AI into fitting AI into their military systems, and this can also have potential impacts on the neighboring nations of China and so on. Next, AI is also sometimes used unethically in some cases such as deepfakes and various other fake news portals and so on. And finally, AI in itself is supposed to take over the entire humanity when it achieves the next level of evolution of AI, right? So we have these various risks, and that is why the UN resolution is also focusing on identifying these risks, particularly when we talk about sustainable developmental goals, which we have to achieve by 2030. That is the various aspects of human life, hunger, livelihood, women rights, climate rights and so on. With respect to this, AI is effectively threatening each and every SDGs. So that is why we have to understand that there must be an international framework which should be governing the same. It has also focused on looking into the impact on the workforce of the nation, particularly of the least developed nations and the developing countries, because if AI is replacing the workforce in these countries. Many will be unemployed. So they must be coming with strategies to respond to the same. And the impacts of AI on the small companies, medium enterprise, or in our nation, we know them as MSMEs. So the small companies, they are also at high risks of, say, being obliterated by the big companies or the big tech companies. So the nations must also be looking into the same. Further, we also need to be very collaborative when we talk about governments, organizations and stakeholders into converging or various rules and regulations regarding AI. Now, with respect to this, the EU is the very first organization in the entire world which has brought with an AI Act. Now, this AI Act is having various categories of categorizing risks coming from AI. Firstly, it is categorizing this risk in this pyramidal form. At the very top, we have unacceptable risks, then high risk, limited and minimal risk coming from AI platforms. So this is a good way of categorizing AI risks, and there is also comprehensive guidelines as to how these risks will be governed by the nations. Then it is also banning several aspects of AI, that is risking citizens' rights such as manipulating human behavior, mass surveillance, emotion recognition and so on. So AI has the potential applications of doing these things, and doing these things will be severely impacting people's rights. So it is having an outright ban on these activities. Then there are also some exemptions with respect to this kind of activities, but this will be with reference to law enforcement, and prior approval from a judicial or administrative capacity must be taken to actually practice or develop AI on these activities too. Then finally, they have also addressed various compliance burden, that the burden placed on business enterprises and startups must be complied by these companies based on these high risk classifications. And finally, the much deliberated generative AI or the AI such as ChatGPT, Gemini and so on, they are also coming under the ambit of this AI law. With reference to this strict kind of legislation by the EU, the UK's framework is kind of light touch regulation. So the UK, they focus on actually consulting with the regulating bodies and gaining more and more knowledge of the AI system, because this technology is still new. We need more and more insight and more understanding of how this technology actually operates in real life. So we need to have more knowledge. That is why the UK's framework is also focusing on learning as of now, and also it is also focusing on filling gaps where the regulation or where the government must be filling and protecting the individual's rights. So unlike the UK's regulations is more soft and decentralized. Now when we talk about India, India is rightfully promoting many schemes to promote the development of AI in the country. Particularly AI is a very prominent theme among India's startups ecosystem right now. So the Indian government is actually giving many grants such as up to 30 lakh rupees in a pre-seed product. That means the AI startups which are just formulating their startup ideas, which are not yet existing as a company. So there the government will be giving a pre-seed fund to those companies. It will be also developing various government schemes and initiatives via AI, and for this particular startup companies to thrive in this ecosystem. So as of now, the country has also apart from this allocated around 10,300 crores for allocation for India AI mission, which will be a public-private partnership, and here this will be promoting the AI startup ecosystem. Then the country is also focusing on deploying the advanced technologies with reference to the graphic processing units, particularly processing units which are very expensive from NVIDIA, and also large multi-model which is actually the basic idea of the AI ecosystem. So it is actually, the government is actually giving the support to the startups to promote this. But on the same hand, the government also needs to balance innovation and risk mitigation, just as the EU and the UK models. Then there must be a gradual approach for fair and inclusive AI. That means the research and development of AI is actually going at a very breakneck speed. So for that, the research must be taking place very gradual, and there should be no haste in developing inclusive AI too. That is making AI available for all. And obviously lessons from the EU and the UK legislations must be adopted, and India can also have a national law on regulating AI. And finally, India can also learn from China's approach of basing algorithm governance that is actually focusing on regulating the algorithms in AI language models, and also focusing on security and ethical part of development of the AI too. So with reference to India's AI regulations, which is not yet a reality as of now because India does not have a particular law regarding the same, so India can learn regarding these various models that we have discussed right now. Now, in the next article, we will be looking at a concept which is known as co-lending, whereby the NBFCs in the country have touched around rupees 1 lakh crore via co-lending. And here, it is a very important topic for our prelims under economic and social development. And here, to understand this topic, we have to understand two aspects first, the banks and the NBFCs. So these are two different entities who say offer loans to the various individuals, and actually this co-lending is possible by the collaboration of both banks and NBFCs when we talk of giving loans to people. Now, when we talk about giving loans to people, we know that in our country there are some sections of the population which require loans in, say, minimal amounts, such as the education sector, such as the agricultural sector, such as the green sector or renewable energy sector. So these sectors need fund, and the government of the day, the banks of the country and the various NBFCs of the country, they must also be giving loans to these sectors because they are actually priority sectors of the nation. So that is why the RBI has also told the various banks in the nations to actually give loans to these sectors. Prominently, if we talk about commercial banks, the banks have to give 40% of their entire loans to these sectors. When we talk about small finance banks and when we talk about regional rural banks, they have to give 75% of their loans to these priority sectors. But some of the issues that the banks face when they give out these loans is actually the reachability to the customers, because the banks are prominently located in cities or say in major rural areas. They are not located to the last mile. But there is one entity which is located at the various last miles or at the doorsteps of the individuals, which are the NBFCs. Now, these non-banking financial companies, which are located in all parts of the nations, they actually give loans to the individuals, and also they have access to various customers of the country too. So it is a win-win situation for both banks and NBFCs to collaborate, because banks, they can give out their priority sector loan targets to the people. The NBFCs, they can take loans from the banks and instead they can serve as an intermediary and they can finally give those loans to these priority sectors. So the primary focus of this co-lending is actually giving credit to the unserved and underserved people, such as people belonging to this sector, such as student loans, small and marginal farmers, women entrepreneurs, startups, and so on. Then this is also making the cost of lending very cheap, because this can be made at a very affordable price, because the banks will be giving large loans at very low costs, which the NBFCs, if they would have given, would have been given at a very higher interest rates, and also the NBFCs are having greater customer services and greater risks. So according to the article, the NBFCs and the banks together co-lended around rupees 1 lakh crore, and this is also very encouraging aspects. And also, if we look at the current composition of the co-lending, mostly the loans are of personal nature, followed by housing loans, unsecured loans, and gold loans. In the next article, we will be looking at Forex trading platforms. According to the RBI, there are some unregulated Forex trading platforms, and they are posing a very big financial risk to the nation. Very important topic for your economics and social development. Now here, we have to understand the terms first. FX platform stands for Forex platforms, or the companies, the private companies who convert Indian rupee to dollar or other currencies and their currencies to Indian rupees. So these are actually private companies which must be registered with RBI, and RBI's authorization must be taken from them, because we know one of the important roles of the RBI is to manage India's foreign reserves, and within the foreign reserves, the conversion of currency is a very important economic activity which is done by these platforms. So what the RBI noted, that there are many unregulated FX platforms which are operating in the country, which are posing some issues. The very first issue, that these companies are not adhering to KYC norms, or they are not giving say proper identification of their customers, and this can lead to threats of anti-money, money laundering issues, because they are not also following anti-money laundering measures and also data protection standards. So they are also posing potential frauds, because these companies are contacting various customers and they are trapping these customers in various unregulated and illegal schemes by them of conversion of Indian currencies into foreign dollars and so on, by giving them lucrative initiatives. And finally, this is posing us financial stability to the entire country, because if we understand, inflow and outflow of dollars and also of Indian rupee is very, very serious issue in the country, which can lead to appreciation and depreciation issues in the nation, and finally this can also lead to inflation and various other macroeconomical effects. So with respect to this, the regulation framework of the RBI is to have first electronic trading platforms regulation framework, so which the RBI has right now, and these platforms are excluding the recognized stock exchanges in the nation. So that is, they have to be registered with the RBI after their authorization from the same. Then this RBI is also having this alert risks of various unregulated platforms. Recently 19 new entities have been added to around total 75 unauthorized platforms in the country. Now for the final section, we will be concerned with prelim snippets from the very 4 important articles today. Firstly, VVPAT, then Finance Commission, Cicadas and Krakatoa volcanic eruption. So looking at VVPAT, this is actually a very, very important piece of electoral reforms which took place in the country. Now VVPAT is actually attached to the electronic voting machine, or EVMs. Now when we talk about electronic voting, we talk about the registration of vote via electronic machines, and when the electronic machine records your vote, it also prints out your vote in a paper slip. So this particular component of the electronic voting machines, or EVMs, is actually known as VVPAT. It is voter verifiable paper audit trail. That means it is consisting of 2 parts, a printer and a status display unit. When you have cast your vote, this VVPAT will be displayed to you, and it will be having the candidate serial number, the name of the candidate and the corresponding party symbols. Now here, the EVMs have been manufactured by the Electronics Corporation of India Limited and the Bharat Electronics Limited, and the VVPATs are also issued by the same. And when how the VVPAT is used for verification, we have to understand, when the voting is done, when the votes are calculated, the EVMs are actually calculating all the votes. But when the EVM's votes have to be corroborated with a paper trail, then we use the VVPAT. But here in India, ECI has the authority to actually individually assess the various EVMs and verify the VVPAT alongside, and we have to understand that when we match the EVM vote with the paper vote, that is more accurate in nature. But in real life, this particular verification is done only in extreme conditions, particularly in conditions when there has been some allegations of rigging in the polls. In the next one, we have Manoj Panda, who has been appointed as one of the members of the Finance Commission, which is a constitutional body under Article 280 of the Constitution. And here this has been constituted by the President at the end of every 5th year. Right, and here they gave recommendations regarding the distribution of tax revenues, which the recommendations are not binding, and here Parliament by law may determine the various qualifications for the appointments of its members. The composition of the commission will be 1 chairperson and 4 other members. The chairperson must have the qualification of having experience in public affairs. The other 4 members must be one who have the qualification experience of a judge in a high court. The other member will be having experience of finance and maintaining finances and accounts of the government. Then the third member will be having expertise in financial matters and in administration. And finally, the final member will be having special knowledge of economics. The tenure of these members will be specified by the President, and the members are also eligible for reappointment. In the next one, we will be looking at a very important incident which will be taking place in 2024. This is actually the event which we know as dual cicada emergence. Cicadas are actually insects which have a time, or say a breeding period of around 17 years, starting from being infants to a full adult insect. Now these cicadas are actually located below the grounds, which are actually underground below the soil, and given favorable climate conditions such as having around 17 degrees Celsius of heat and rainfall conditions, they emerge on the ground after around 17 years. Now once they have emerged on the grounds, they are adults and they exist only for around 4 to 6 weeks, and within this 4 to 6 weeks, when they have emerged from the grounds, they totally fly away all across the regions on which they have emerged. Particularly this takes place frequently in the USA, and since around 1803, since around 200 years, right, there is double periodic cicadas which will be emerging from the grounds. That means there will be two distinct species of cicadas which will be coming over ground, and they are actually known for their loud and complex sounding signals and songs, and only the male cicadas are having the ability to generate noises and not the female ones, and they generate generally during annual frequencies, and they can be dormant for around 13 to 17 years, as we have already discussed here. And a very interesting fact about is them, they have around 5 eyes. Okay, and the final article of the day is Mount Krakatoa, which was one of the historically most active volcanoes ever. And here, according to the volcanic explosivity index, it had 6, and 6 is a very serious kind of volcano. If you can locate Krakatoa, it is located on the Indonesian islands, and the force of this 6 volcanic explosion index is around the 13,000 times of the Hiroshima Nagasaki bomb that was dropped. So you can imagine the amount of violence or amount of explosion that took place back then. And from this, the pyroclastic flows emerged when the volcano erupted. The pyroclastic, or say the various molten rocks, they emerged into the atmosphere, spreading huge black clouds of sulfur and various other chemicals across the world, which also led to the emergence of severe, say, small scale earthquakes and tsunamis too. It led to global temperature drops because it supplied sulfur aerosols into the atmosphere, which also cooled the total global temperatures. And finally, it also gave various vivid sunsets because of the splittering effects or sunlight splittering effects of the aerosols in the atmosphere. And as of here, you can see in the list the various deadliest volcanic eruptions all across the world. And with this, I thank you all for a very engaging discussion on the current affairs of today. I wish you all the very best of luck and efforts for your future endeavors. Please do follow the quiz and attempt the quiz in the coming period.